So I wanted to kind of focus in on something like practical that's going on in geopolitics right now, and that's like the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump is trying to strike with Iran. So, like, I don't know. I want to understand the Libertarian Institute's position on the Iran nuclear deal, or what do you think America's interests are moving forward while Iran is trying to acquire a nuclear weapon?
Well, your premise is wrong there. So here's what it is, and it's a complicated subject, but I'm with it. The bottom line to start is Iran has a latent nuclear deterrent, which is essentially equal to Germany, Brazil, Japan, where they've mastered the fuel cycle. They've proven that they know how to enrich uranium. They could make a nuclear bomb, but they don't. And they're essentially announcing to the world, don't make me, and then they won't.
How long would it take them?
So that's a great question. So first of all, they mastered the fuel cycle 20 years ago. So this has been their position. They could have built atom bombs by now, but they haven't tried. So right now, they could achieve one atomic bomb of enriched uranium, in a shorter time than when the deal was still being followed, because they have built up a stockpile of lower enriched uranium. So they could take that stockpile and enrich it higher. Before Trump tore up the deal, under the Obama deal, they exported all of their stockpile out of the country to France, and then France would turn it into fuel rods and ship it back in.
You're explaining, but I want to understand, what is the Libertarian Institute?
Well, I'm just saying, I was answering her specific question there. My position is I support, and the vast majority of Americans, I think it was 68% in the poll, said they support Trump's diplomacy with Iran to make a new deal with Iran.
So if Iran tries to get nuclear weapons, how should the United States respond?
Well, to skip ahead to if it came to that, no, not skip ahead, because you're kind of assuming the conclusion in a way. It's like this, basically, okay? It's a Mexican-type standoff, sort of. Not like more than two people pointing guns at each other, but sort of, where they're saying, look, man, in body language, diplomatic language, they're basically saying, if you bomb us, well, then we'll have no choice but to make nukes then. So don't bomb us, and we won't make nukes.
No, and America's
saying, don't make nukes, and we won't bomb you. Right? So we have a perfect basis for a negotiation as things stand right now. They're not trying to make a nuclear bomb.
They're not trying to make a nuclear bomb.
No, they're not trying to make a nuclear bomb. And in fact, you can read from February the 5th, where Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI, put out her threat assessment, and they just said the same thing that the government's been saying. Wait, let me finish now. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, just reaffirmed what the CIA has been saying since 2007, which is they have not made the political decision to try to make nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I feel like
they do not have a nuclear weapons program.
So if Iran decides to try to make a nuclear weapon, how should the United States respond?
Well, I'm saying there's every reason to believe they won't unless we bomb them first. Okay, so you're sort of starting from, okay, but never mind all that.
I'm going down. I mean,
wait, is the hypothetical without a deal or after a deal?
I'm just trying to understand. If push comes to shove and there's no nuclear deal.
I'm a non-interventionist either way.
So I'm trying to understand. So if Iran decides to try to get a nuclear weapon, you think what? We should do nothing.
Yeah. The same position that Eisenhower had on the USSR.
I don't care about Eisenhower. I'm
the same position that Johnson had on Mao Zedong, the craziest person, the most murder psychopath who ever lived. Johnson said, I'm not going to attack him to prevent him from getting a nuclear weapon.
So you should just allow...
Your
position is we should just allow Iran to try get a nuclear weapon. What do you think the consequences of that in the area would be?
Well, according to Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud Barak...
I want to do according to Scott Horton.
I agree with Netanyahu when he told Jeffrey Goldberg that he does not fear a first strike from Iran at all. He fears an Israeli brain drain, that talented Israelis of means would just get up, pack up, and move to Florida and feel safer there. And that would be bad for Israel, and it would give Hezbollah possibly more freedom of action in the region. So that was what...
It's a little bit rich because
that was what Benjamin Netanyahu...
And you have no concerns about acquiring a nuclear weapon. And I know you could pivot to Israel.
That Israel has a nuclear deterrent.
I'm sure...
Israel has more than 200 nuclear bombs.
I know, but I'm trying to go like...
So what are you worried about?
I I don't think you've thought this fully through. So that's why I'm asking you, what do you think the consequences would be in the Middle East? Do you think Saudi Arabia would want to try to acquire a nuclear weapon if Iran did? I'm begging the question because they've said so already. So do you have any concerns about, nuclear... What?
Actually, one of the proposals right now is that they would have a joint nuclear program together.
Okay, so
under a consortium, just like we have multinational nuclear consortiums.
Mohammed bin Salman said that if Iran got a nuclear weapon, they would want to acquire a nuclear weapon. So I guess the bigger issue here would be nuclear proliferation across the Middle East. So I don't know, is that a concern, or is this a pipe dream?
You are begging the question when your whole hypothetical is the day after tomorrow, the Ayatollah decides to make a nuke for no reason.
They've been saying they want to make a nuke for decades.
Haven't.
No, they haven't been.
You're wrong about that.
I think you might be in a little bit of a
anyone
bubble
watching
if you think
this,
otherwise.
just look up the threat assessment from February of this year by Tulsi Gabbard, and it says they have not made the political decision to attempt.
Maybe I'm a little bit crazy, but I think it's bad for a regime that says death to America to get a nuclear weapon, and to think there aren't going to be consequences of nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, I think is naive and nearsighted, frankly. And again, it doesn't even sound like you have this stuff thought out, frankly.
Yeah, no, I don't know anything about it. They signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty back in 1968.
You're so scared to say so. You think Iran should just la-di-da be able to get a nuclear weapon?
Why won't you just let me finish?
Go ahead.
They signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. They mastered the fuel cycle in 2005. They have never enriched to weapons grade. They still have a safeguards agreement with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which has inspectors at all of their facilities. When they signed the 2015 deal with Obama and the rest of the Security Council, they poured concrete into their Iraq heavy water reactor. They expanded inspections even to non-nuclear military facilities and scaled back the number of centrifuges spinning at Natanz. I haven't thought this through at all. I don't know nothing about this.
Why does Iran need a nuclear program at all is the question. Why?
Because so they can sell their oil and burn their local domestic supply of uranium that they mine domestically. They don't buy it on the international market. They have their own supply of uranium. They sell their oil for money.
Yeah.
And have a domestic. And as I already, the first thing I said about this was it's a latent nuclear deterrent. Wasn't that the first thing I said? Was that it's a latent nuclear deterrent? Just like Brazil has, like Japan has.
So latent nuclear deterrent, but they don't have any plans.
If China started threatening Japan, Japan could convert their civilian nuclear program to a military nuclear program.
They already have nuclear weapons. I mean...
All right. I didn't say if China got nuclear weapons. I said if China started threatening Japan with them, then China knows Japan could turn around and make nukes. Right now, they don't have nukes because they've been nuked, and they've got an anti-nuke principle that they're sticking by.
Oh, there are nuclear umbrellas.
But if push comes to shove,
going on, but sure.
And that's true. They're allies with the United States. But if push comes to shove, they have demonstrated that they can make nuclear weapons. Yeah. That's the exact same.
I guess my point here is that nuclear proliferation in the Middle East is bad.
Guys, hey guys,
Elad.
Why are you talking about me like this? This is ridiculous. You're just playing straight for the camera. You're not even talking to me anymore.
I'm talking to you, but
you're not. You're talking to them.
You love to pivot to random things while I'm trying to get specific, and you weasel around my questions.
He's not weaseling around your questions at all.
I said they mastered the fuel cycle in 2005. They've been able to enrich uranium since then, and they've never enriched to weapons grade. They've stayed within the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Even when Trump tore up the Obama deal, they still stayed within it. And even the deal itself, the JCPOA itself, stipulates that if America breaks the deal, Iran is allowed to stop abiding by some of its restrictions and still stay in the deal. And they are still in the deal with our allies, the British and the French, on the UN Security Council, as well as our adversaries, Russia and China. And under that old deal, by the way, it was only majority rule. It was not any country can veto like normal UNSC rules. So it was if America, Britain, and France agree about an accusation against Iran, they have to open up to inspections, whatever we want, or else the full global sanctions regime goes automatically back into place. It was a perfectly good deal. Donald Trump is clearly trying to work out a deal along those lines right now. The question is whether he's going to stick with this essentially deal killing poison pill that says that Iran must cease all enrichment, because they're not going to cease all enrichment because, again, they need that latent deterrent.
So I think
hold on. I want to bring this back to the U.S. and what this means for the United States, because it's my sense that this we can talk about the history in the Middle East all night, but it's my sense that the situation that happened last night with the murder of the two Israelis, what you said earlier about it being terrible for Gaza and stuff, I think that you're spot on with that. But I do feel like, as much as he says that this is about Israel and about Gaza, I do think that in the United States, there is a very strong current of socialist leftists that have nothing but disdain for the United States. And his previous comments about Luigi Mangione, I think that those are worth noting, because it did happen in the U.S.
Yep.
I think that the situation in Gaza for a lot of American leftists is just an excuse, just like you were saying that the what bin Laden does is using the situation in Gaza to recruit people. I feel like that's the situation in Gaza is done by the left does the same thing.
I agree with you.
And that's like an overlap. But
look,
go ahead.
and communists are the worst on everything. We used to make fun of them because where'd the anti-war left go? It wasn't even Obama. It was once Nancy Pelosi took over the House in 2006, and the anti-war left disappeared. They climbed back into power on Nancy Sheehan's back, and then they vanished. And we used to laugh. See, where'd the anti-war left go? Now we're like, oh, man, I wish they would have just stayed gone. We don't need anti-American, anti-Western communists taking our side on anything. It just looks bad. It's like when you agree with Joe Biden about bombing the poor Gazans. You're like, man, I'm getting Joe Biden all over me, as well as the blood of these poor kids. You don't want that association, And I wish that all of these kids would just become patriots and capitalists and then continue to protest the war. Remember Clean for Gene? Not, this is before our time, but when Eugene McCarthy ran for president, and he was really wanted to end the war in Vietnam. And all the hippies cut their hair and shaved their beards and said, let's get clean for Gene and go out there and show these people that we're not anti-Americans, we're pro-Americans, but we're pro-peace here. Yeah. And that is absolutely what matters. And yes, no, communists burn everything they touch. And it makes the perfect foil for the war party. That look who's on the side of peace, an assassin. You know what I mean? And then you just get to blow off everything else. But meanwhile, we really should talk about what's happening in Gaza, because it's an absolute horror show. Donald Trump himself said that people there are starving, and that's not an accident. There has been a full blockade. They haven't allowed any trucks in there in 11 weeks. And you can read it on antiwar.com every day. There are literally babies starving to death. And never mind a couple of hundred people getting bombed to death every single day. It's like, imagine the Waco massacre over and over and over every single day for a year and a half. And people talk about sometimes on this show too about Gaza and Palestine like it's a separate sovereign nation. And this, as Ben Shapiro always says, like, what would we do if Mexico attacked across the Rio Grande? But that's not right. This is an Indian reservation. The Israelis conquered it back in 1967. They de facto annexed it in 67. It's completely under their control. It's their siege. It would be like if some black gangsters in South Chicago went to North Chicago and committed some crimes, and then we built a wall around South Chicago and just started bombing the ghetto and killed 50,000 people, bombing them with airstrikes over what was essentially a massive crime, a terrible crime, or even on the margin, I mean, obviously a terrorist attack too, and that wasn't the marginal part. I was going to say an act of war in a sense. But what's proportion to 1,200 dead? And I don't know if you guys have covered this at all, but you must know. And Max Blumenthal did a fantastic documentary about this called Atrocity, Inc. You guys should have him on here, man.
We've had him on. We actually sat down and talked to him. Yeah.
So he did this thing, Atrocity, Inc., where he showed where all of the worst atrocities from October the 7th were embellished. The beheaded babies, the baby that was cut from the pregnant woman's stomach, the baby thrown in the oven, babies hung from clothes wires. Now, why do they do that? It was already like over 800 civilians, and I don't know the exact number, but it was hundreds of civilians along with, but there were soldiers too.
Okay.
But I'm just saying some combatants, but which combatants were under the rules are fair game, but non-combatants are not. But I'm just saying, as horrible as it already was, why did they tell their own people, your mom wasn't just killed, she was raped to death all day? So why do they do that? Wait, let me finish. Okay. They did it so they could justify actually cutting kids' heads off, right? They have been the ones killing babies. They have just short of 900 named babies short of their first birthday who've died in Gaza over the last year and a half, being killed over the last year and a half. That's real.
We had Max on, and we had it was back in the old studio, and I'm a little skeptical of Max, and the reason is because when we were talking,
he shows his notes in that documentary, though. He shows his work the whole time. Everyone can watch it. It's called Atrocity, Inc., and he proves it. He cites Israeli media for most of it.
Okay, well, his one of the things that really set me off about it was when he was talking about the people at the rave that was attacked. He was like, oh, and he brought up, he's like, these kids were on drugs and blah blah. And I'm like, I mean, look, I'm in a band, and I remember what it was like hearing stories about the Bataclan and the terror attack in France. And, I knew people that knew. I didn't know anyone that was actually at the Bataclan, but I knew people that knew people. Like we had people.
What was the context of bringing up that they were on drugs?
I don't know. That's why I was like, why?
I'd have to hear it.
And it rubbed me the wrong way.
He's a good dude. He's a leftist, but he's a good dude.
Yeah, like I said,
he's not anti-American. He is a patriot. Dude.
All right.
He's just And he's hardcore in this issue. And look, I mean, I interviewed him back, and he moved to Israel and lived there for 10 months to write his book, Goliath, back years ago. And, he's heavily invested in this. He went during the 2014, like just at the very tail end of the 2014 campaign, he and Dan Cohen went in there, went to Gaza, and they did this incredible documentary. It's called Killing Gaza, and everybody can watch it for free online. It's Max Blumenthal and Dan Cohen. And man, I'll tell you, they go around, they interview all these people, and you can call it selective editing or whatever, but like, here's two nice Jewish boys parading around the Gaza Strip, putting their microphone in all these people's faces. And everybody's talking. They sound like they could be a Texan or from wherever you're from, that you see this dirt, this is my grandfather's house, this is my land, and you can't have it, and I'll fight for it, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody says Allah says that I'm supposed to hate and kill Jews and Christians and blah, blah, blah. Nobody says that. Nobody says we hate your freedom. Everybody says we're poor, exploded victims, and all we want is justice and to be free. And watch that documentary, dude. You see the humanity in these people, dude. They're exactly like us. There's so much propaganda to try to make us hate the Palestinian people, but Hamas is not the Palestinian people. And as I guess you know, the Likud foisted Hamas on the Palestinian people in the first place, just so they could cynically say, we have no partner for peace. You don't expect us to negotiate with terrorists, do you? When, of course, they were the ones who put them in power. And you can read it in the Wall Street Journal by Andrew Higgins, and you can read it in UPI by Richard Sale, and you can read it in Robert Dreyfuss's great book, Devil's Game, and in Trita Parsi's great book, The Treacherous Alliance.
I'm familiar with the situation where the Likud party was looking to have. They were sending money to Hamas or whatever, so that way Hamas would stay in power, so they had basically an enemy to fight.
And they would say, this is how we prevent a Palestinian state. We keep the Palestinians divided between Fatah in the West Bank and the religious kook Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And then this is what Dov Weissglass, who was an advisor to Ariel Sharon, said. He says, now that we've withdrawn and Hamas is prominent in Gaza, now we have a no one to talk to certificate from the U.S. Congress. And it says that we have no one to talk to, sorry, and we won't have anyone to talk to until Gaza becomes Norway. See you then, shalom, he says. So, right? So in other words, they want that land. They don't want peace. They want to kill those people, drive them out of there, and steal their property. Even though God says you're not supposed to covet your neighbor's property.
Hold on a second. What were you going to say, Elad?
I was going to ask for how Israel props up Hamas. What's the specific allegation? That
yeah.
they allowed money that Qatar was sending them through, that they didn't continue to sanction money?
Well, it depends. If you go back in history, they aided and abetted the rise of Hamas in the first place. The Shin Bet and the Mossad both working together did that in beginning, I believe, in 1988 and into... I think that's right. And into the 1990s was when they did that in the first place, was to divide and for the purpose of dividing and conquering the Palestinians. As far as Netanyahu's policy, I'm not exactly sure when the Qatari money began.
It was in the early aughts.
But there was Israeli money that was going directly to them first before they got the Qataris to do it. And then I have an article that I would recommend to you. Is called Netanyahu's Support for Hamas Backfired. And in there, I have all the sources and hyperlinks for you there for tons of sources and from mostly Israeli press and quoting Likud after Likud after Likud, parliamentarian and propagandist, explaining why this is a brilliant Machiavellian strategy to make the Europeans, the Americans, and the Tel Aviv liberals shut up about a Palestinian state. Because as long as Hamas rules the Palestinian state, we have a no one to talk to certificate, and we can say, we have no partner for peace. It's always these little cliches, right? That you're supposed to be easy to memorize. We have no partner for peace. Say it with me now. We have no partner for peace. And that means we get to kill them all and steal all their property. See what a great gimmick
I'm trying to understand.
Right.
I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say because they allowed sanctioned money from Qatar to eventually go in, that they like prop them up. I think it's stripping away.
That's what they said.
Can I please, Scott?
That's
I
what
let
they
you talk
said.
for minutes, please.
Sure, but that's what they said.
Great. So I think it's a stretch because you're really stripping the agency from the Palestinians. To think like the Palestinians don't support Hamas, I think you're kind of deluding yourself to think that like the reason that Hamas is in power is because of the Israelis. When they had their last election, Scott, please don't. When they had their last election, they elected Hamas. And I think this also speaks to some of, isn't it, Scott, right? When they had their last election, they elected Hamas?
Well, let's zoom in a little bit. In fact, what happened was George W. Bush and Condoleezza Rice forced them to hold an election was step one. Step two was that Hamas did not win a majority in a single district anywhere in Palestine, in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. They won a meager plurality in the parliament in Gaza. And then George W. Bush, Elliot Abrams, Ehud Olmert, and it's still Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, all worked together to try to do a coup, to overthrow Hamas and put Fatah in power.
You don't think Hamas is popular among the Gazans?
I'm just telling you the history of what happened was that
but you're beating around the point.
They won a bare plurality, not a majority in a single district anywhere. And this was in 2006.
You could say that of Likud in Israel too, by the way.
When half of the population of the Gaza Strip were under 18 and unable to vote anyway. And then
you're deluding yourself to think these people don't support Hamas, brother.
And
you're
then
really deluding yourself. Like, I don't understand. You don't think these people in Gaza support Hamas?
And then they did this failed coup.
Even in the West, they support Hamas. They're
Called The
apologists for Hamas
Gaza
here in the
Bombshell. It's in Vanity Fair by David Rose, and it's about how Elliot Abrams, the neoconservative, had this great idea that what we'll do is a coup against Hamas, and we'll put Fatah in there, but it backfired, and Hamas grabbed all their guns and ran Fatah out of there. And so, no, you're telling me, you're sitting at this table telling me the people of the Gaza Strip have popular sovereignty and the rule of law, and that Hamas is the duly elected power in the Gaza Strip, which is nothing but an Israeli
I know
prison
the people
camp.
in Gaza
They're
support
nothing but
Hamas.
you know what they are?
I think, and
they're
even here, their supporters support Hamas.
They're the Aryan nations running a prison. They're the Crips running the black part of a
with
prison.
With the Israelis, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't let the money go in, then they're in a starving. They're in a starving prison. You didn't let their money in.
Hey, Elad, we got to move on.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.